The Phantom Ranger of Yosemite National Park. It was a misty evening in Yosemite National Park, and the sun had already set. Rachel and her friends were walking along the park trail, admiring the beauty of the surroundings when they noticed a ranger standing in the distance. As they got closer, they realized that something was off about the ranger. His skin was ashen, and his eyes glowed eerily in the dim light. "Good evening," the ranger said, his voice raspy and faint. Rachel and her friends hesitated, unsure of how to respond. The ranger then warned them of the dangerous areas in the park, telling them to stay away. They listened carefully, sensing something off about the situation. As they continued down the trail, they could feel the ranger's presence following them. The air grew colder, and they began to hear strange noises coming from the nearby trees. Suddenly, the ranger appeared in front of them, his pale face inches away from Rachel's. "Leave this place," he whispered ominously, "or suffer the consequences." Terrified, Rachel and her friends turned to run, but they were stopped by an invisible force. The ranger's ghostly figure loomed over them, trapping them in place. The sound of rustling leaves grew louder, and they could feel a malevolent presence closing in on them. It was only when they reached the safety of their cabin that they realized the true nature of the ranger's warning. For the rest of their trip, they stayed close to the main trail, too afraid to explore the dark corners of the park. Despite their fear, Rachel and her friends couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every rustling leaf and creaking branch sent chills down their spines, and they found themselves constantly looking over their shoulders. One night, while huddled around a campfire, they heard a faint voice calling out to them from the woods. It was the ranger again, warning them of the dangers that lurked in the shadows. Rachel and her friends were paralyzed with fear, unsure of what to do next. They had never believed in ghosts before, but now they were faced with the terrifying reality of the Phantom Ranger. As the days passed, the Phantom Ranger continued to haunt them, appearing in the corners of their vision and whispering ominous warnings in their ears. They began to lose sleep, and the stress of the situation began to take its toll. It wasn't until they spoke to a park ranger about their experiences that they learned the truth about the Phantom Ranger. It was said that a ranger had gone missing in the park decades ago, and that his ghost had been haunting the area ever since. Rachel and her friends knew that they had to leave the park as soon as possible, but they couldn't shake the feeling that the Phantom Ranger was still watching them, waiting for his next victims. They packed their bags and left the park, vowing never to return. After leaving Yosemite National Park, Rachel and her friends tried to move on with their lives, but the memory of the Phantom Ranger continued to haunt them. They couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, even in the safety of their own homes. One night, Rachel woke up to the sound of rustling leaves outside her window. She sat up in bed, heart pounding in her chest, and peered out into the darkness. That's when she saw him, the Phantom Ranger, standing just outside her window, staring at her with his glowing eyes. Rachel screamed and scrambled out of bed, but the Phantom Ranger disappeared as quickly as he had appeared. She tried to convince herself that it was just a nightmare, but deep down, she knew that the Phantom Ranger was real and that he was still watching her. Rachel and her friends tried to find answers about the Phantom Ranger, but every lead they pursued led to a dead end. They began to feel like they were going crazy, and the stress of the situation began to strain their relationships. One day, Rachel received a package in the mail. Inside was a worn journal filled with the ramblings of a park ranger who had gone missing in Yosemite National Park decades ago. As she read through the journal, Rachel began to realize that the Phantom Ranger was more than just a ghost. He was a warning. The ranger who had written the journal had been convinced that something evil was at work in the park, and that the Phantom Ranger was a manifestation of that evil. Rachel and her friends knew that they had to do something to stop the evil in Yosemite National Park, and so they decided to return to the park to investigate. They knew that they were taking a risk, but they were determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. As they entered the park, they could feel the same sense of dread and unease that they had felt on their first visit. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, and they could hear strange noises coming from the woods. They followed the clues left in the journal and eventually stumbled upon a hidden cave deep in the heart of the park. Inside the cave, they found evidence of a dark ritual, candles, skulls, and strange symbols etched into the walls. That's when they heard a voice, deep and guttural, calling out to them from the shadows. They turned to run, but it was too late. The evil in the park had already claimed them as its victims. The Phantom Ranger watched from the shadows as Rachel and her friends were consumed by the darkness. Knowing that his warning had come too late, he disappeared back into the woods, his ghostly form blending in with the trees as the evil in the park continued to thrive, waiting for its next victims. Years passed, and the story of Rachel and her friends became just another legend in Yosemite National Park. Visitors continued to flock to the park, unaware of the dark secrets that lurked in the shadows. But the Phantom Ranger still watched over the park, his ghostly form haunting the woods and warning visitors of the dangers that lay ahead. He knew that he couldn't stop the evil in the park, but he could at least try to save a few lives. One day, a group of hikers stumbled upon the same cave that Rachel and her friends had discovered years before. They were curious and decided to explore the cave, unaware of the danger that awaited them. As they made their way deeper into the cave, they began to hear strange noises coming from the shadows. That's when they saw him, the Phantom Ranger, warning them to turn back before it was too late. The hikers were terrified, but they knew that they had to listen to the warning. They turned back and fled the cave, narrowly avoiding the same fate that had befallen Rachel and her friends. The hikers reported their encounter to the park rangers, but they were dismissed as just another group of tourists with wild imaginations. But the Phantom Ranger knew the truth. The evil in the park was still alive and well, and it would continue to claim its victims for years to come. And so the legend of the Phantom Ranger lives on, a warning to all who dare to venture into the dark corners of America's national parks. The next time you visit a park, remember his warning and stay vigilant, for you never know what lurks in the shadows. Before we go on with the stories, I remind you to like the video and subscribe to support the channel. The Curse of Yellowstone's Old Faithful. When Rachel and her friends decided to take a road trip to Yellowstone National Park, they were excited to witness the famous Old Faithful geyser. As they arrived, they were mesmerized by the beauty of the natural wonder, but Rachel couldn't shake the eerie feeling that something was off. Ignoring the warning signs, Rachel's friend, Mark, decided to get closer to the geyser to get a better look. As he touched the surface of the geyser, the ground shook and a loud hissing sound filled the air. Suddenly, Old Faithful erupted with a violent force, spraying hot water and steam everywhere. Rachel and her friends ran for their lives, narrowly escaping the scorching water. After returning home, Rachel began to notice that strange things were happening in her life. Her once promising career took a turn for the worse, her relationships faltered, and her health declined. She couldn't shake the feeling that the curse of Old Faithful had followed her home. One night, Rachel had a terrifying nightmare. She dreamt that she was back at Old Faithful, and the geyser was erupting with a dark, malevolent energy. The water turned black, and the steam formed a sinister, ghostly figure that reached out to grab her. She woke up in a cold sweat, convinced that the curse of Old Faithful was real and that it had taken hold of her. Rachel tried everything to break the curse, from seeking the help of spiritual healers to going on a pilgrimage to Yellowstone to apologize to the geyser. But nothing worked, and her life continued to spiral out of control. In the end, Rachel realized that the only way to break the curse was to face her fear and confront Old Faithful once and for all. She returned to Yellowstone National Park and stood at the edge of the geyser, summoning all her courage. As she looked into the churning water, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. The curse was broken, and Rachel was finally free from its grasp. But to this day, she can't help but feel a chill whenever she hears the name Old Faithful, knowing that the curse still lurks in the shadows, waiting for its next victim to fall prey to its dark power. As Rachel made her way back to her car, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She turned around to see a figure standing in the distance, watching her intently. The figure was tall and dark, with glowing red eyes that seemed to pierce through her very soul. She froze in fear, realizing that this was the manifestation of the curse itself. As she tried to run, she felt an invisible force pull her back, and she fell to the ground, scraping her knees. The figure was getting closer and closer, and she could feel its hot breath on the back of her neck. She closed her eyes, waiting for the worst, but when she opened them again, the figure was gone. Rachel stumbled to her feet and ran as fast as she could back to her car. She peeled out of the parking lot, leaving Yellowstone National Park behind, vowing never to return again. But the curse of Old Faithful had already taken hold of her. Rachel's life continued to spiral out of control, and she felt like she was living in a never-ending nightmare. She couldn't escape the feeling that something dark and malevolent was following her, watching her every move. Years went by, and Rachel grew old and tired. She had never been able to break the curse of Old Faithful, and she knew that she never would. As she lay on her deathbed, she whispered a prayer for forgiveness, hoping that somehow, someway, the curse would finally be lifted. But as she took her last breath, Rachel knew that the curse would outlive her, haunting the visitors of Yellowstone National Park for generations to come. The Devil's Den of Mammoth Cave National Park. The locals whisper that it is a cursed spot, a place where the veil between the world of the living and the world of the dead is thin. It is said that those who venture into the Devil's Den risk encountering the devil himself. He appears as a tall, dark figure with glowing red eyes, his laughter echoing through the caverns like the howl of a beast. One night, a group of friends decided to explore the Devil's Den. They entered the cave with flashlights and maps, eager to uncover the secrets of this mysterious place. As they descended deeper into the earth, they felt a chill in the air that had nothing to do with the temperature. Suddenly, one of them screamed, and they all turned to see a tall, dark figure with glowing red eyes standing before them. It was the devil himself, his sinister laughter echoing through the caverns. The friends tried to run, but the devil chased them relentlessly, his footsteps echoing through the cave like thunder. They stumbled and fell, desperate to escape the creature's grasp. Just when they thought they were safe, they heard his laughter again, and the devil appeared before them once more. Terrified and exhausted, the friends finally found their way back to the entrance of the cave, but they knew that the Devil's Den had changed them forever. They could still hear his laughter echoing in their minds, and they knew that they had come too close to the world of the dead. From that day forward, they warned others not to venture into the Devil's Den, but there were always those who didn't listen, and the legend of the devil in Mammoth Cave National Park lived on. Rumors spread quickly, and soon the Devil's Den became one of the most notorious spots in the national park. Visitors came from far and wide to see if they could catch a glimpse of the devil himself. Many of them returned with stories of hearing strange noises, feeling cold drafts, and seeing shadowy figures lurking in the darkness. Some even claimed to have seen the devil, his glowing red eyes watching them from the shadows. Despite the warnings, there were always those who dared to explore the Devil's Den. One group of adventurers decided to spend the night deep in the cave, determined to uncover its secrets once and for all. As they settled in for the night, they heard strange noises echoing through the caverns. They tried to ignore them, chalking it up to the natural sounds of the cave, but the noises grew louder and more insistent. Suddenly, they heard a blood-curdling scream, and they all scrambled to their feet, trying to find the source of the sound. In the flickering light of their flashlights, they saw a shadowy figure looming over them, its glowing red eyes fixed on their faces. Petrified with fear, they backed away slowly, but the creature advanced on them, its laughter echoing through the cave like the roar of a wild animal. As they ran for the entrance of the cave, they heard the creature's footsteps pounding on the rock behind them, and they knew that they would never make it out alive. But miraculously, they stumbled into the daylight, gasping for breath and covered in sweat. They looked back at the cave entrance, half expecting to see the devil himself emerging from the shadows. From that day forward, the Devil's Den was known as a place of terror and darkness, a place where the veil between the world of the living and the world of the dead was at its thinnest, and no one ever ventured into the cave again without the utmost caution and respect for the forces that lay within. The Disappearing Hikers of Grand Canyon National Park. It was a beautiful day in Grand Canyon National Park. The sun was shining, the birds were chirping, and the canyon's majestic beauty stretched out before them. It was the perfect day for a hike, or so they thought. A group of friends set out on the Bright Angel Trail, eager to explore the canyon's depths. As they made their way down the trail, they noticed something strange. There were no other hikers on the trail. They had expected to see dozens of people on such a beautiful day, but they were completely alone. The group shrugged it off and continued on their hike, taking in the stunning views of the canyon. But as they descended deeper into the canyon, the air grew colder and the sky grew darker. The once clear path became increasingly difficult to follow, and they soon found themselves lost. As the sun began to set, the group started to panic. They had no food, no water, and no idea where they were. They tried to retrace their steps, but the trail seemed to have disappeared. That's when they heard it, a faint whispering in the darkness. They looked around, but there was no one there. The whispering grew louder, and they began to feel as though they were being watched. Suddenly, one of the hikers disappeared without a trace. The others searched frantically for their friend, but they were nowhere to be found. And then, one by one, the remaining hikers began to disappear as well. Some say it was the work of a serial killer who stalked the canyon, preying on unsuspecting hikers. Others claim it was the work of supernatural forces, such as skinwalkers or malevolent spirits that haunted the canyon. To this day, hikers still disappear without a trace in Grand Canyon National Park. And those who venture too deep into the canyon at night say they can hear the faint whispering of the lost hikers, warning them to turn back before it's too late. Those who have heard the whispering and ignored the warning have never been seen or heard from again. The legends of the canyon and its cursed trails have kept many visitors on edge. But the authorities refuse to acknowledge the existence of any supernatural forces and attribute the disappearances to the harsh conditions and unforgiving terrain. However, some locals believe that the canyon is cursed by the spirits of the Native American tribes who once inhabited the area. According to legend, the tribes were forced out of their ancestral lands by the settlers who took over the region, and the spirits of the ancestors continue to seek vengeance on those who trespass in the canyon. Despite the warnings, some thrill seekers still venture into the canyon at night looking for a scare, but those who dare to do so often regret it. Many have reported hearing the sounds of footsteps following them, only to turn around and find no one there. Others have seen shadowy figures lurking in the darkness, watching them with glowing eyes. Some believe that the lost hikers still roam the canyon, searching for a way out. Their spirits, trapped in the canyon's cursed depths, call out to the living, warning them of the danger that lies ahead. So if you ever find yourself hiking in Grand Canyon National Park, beware. The canyon may be beautiful, but it holds many secrets, and if you venture too far into its depths, you may never return. The Wendigo of Acadia National Park. Deep within the dense forests of Acadia National Park, there lurks a creature of legend and fear, the Wendigo. It is said that the Wendigo is a demonic being, a cannibalistic spirit that possesses those who dare to venture too far into the wilderness. One summer evening, a group of hikers set out on a remote trail in the heart of the park. They were experienced outdoorsmen with years of trekking and camping under their belts. But as the sun began to set and the shadows grew longer, they began to feel a sense of unease. Suddenly, they heard a sound, a low growl that seemed to come from all around them. They froze in fear, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. And then they saw it, a tall, thin figure with glowing eyes, emerging from the shadows. It was the Wendigo. The hikers tried to run, but the creature was too fast, too powerful. It seemed to be everywhere at once, darting in and out of the trees, always just out of reach. And then it began to speak, a voice that seemed to come from the very depths of the earth. "Come to me," it said. "Come deeper into the woods. I will show you things you have never seen before." The hikers felt a strange compulsion to follow the creature, to give in to its dark and terrible power. But as they stumbled blindly through the underbrush, they began to realize the truth. The Wendigo was leading them to their doom. One by one, the hikers fell prey to the creature's hunger, their flesh torn and devoured by its razor-sharp teeth. And as the night wore on, the Wendigo continued to roam the park, searching for its next victim. For those who venture into the wilds of Acadia National Park, the Wendigo is a constant, terrifying presence, a reminder of the dangers that lurk just beyond the beaten path. They spoke of the creature's haunting voice, the way it seemed to know their deepest fears and desires, and how it lured them deeper into the woods with promises of power and knowledge. But in the end, all it brought them was pain and terror. The park rangers tried to dismiss the stories of the Wendigo as mere superstition, but deep down, they knew there was something out there in the woods, something dark and ancient and hungry. They warned visitors to stay on the marked trails, to travel in groups, and to never venture out after dark. But still, there were those who were drawn to the wilderness, who sought the thrill of the unknown and the chance to commune with nature. Thanks for tuning into our scary story today. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more spooky tales like this one. Until next time, stay safe and keep your lights on at night.